put them in now if we want.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone.
Try to bring in Jared.
I'm doing it right now. There's too many video sources. It's telling me it's still limited to 4, guys.
Okay.
All right. So we'll just rotate. Welcome, everyone. My name is Yeli Ichile, and this is our third installment of the Blacklash Collective's town hall meeting to discuss issues relevant to Africana people. And this evening, our topic is gendered intimate household violence. I'm going to read a brief introduction, and I'm going to invite all of the collective members to present their papers, and then we'll kind of get into the discussion. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We pray that our words are strong medicine. We hope that all of you are prepared to discuss and think critically, think for African people, think together with us. All right, so our introduction reads as follows. 2 weeks ago, a friend of one of the collective's members called. Her voice was a mixture of tears, bruises, and looking for answers. That member listened. She had been assaulted by her unmarried male partner and father of their new child. She asked, "How could I have let this happen to me?" Continuing, she said to this male member, "Would you have done this to your wife?" He said no, and insisted she not blame herself and that the male partner has a responsibility, a burden for which she should not shoulder. The focus turned immediately to getting her and her 6-month-old child to a safe place with support and where they could gather themselves, and then turn to healing under the bruises and backaches. Next steps or room for reconciliation could wait. A sister friend of hers was on her way to pick them up. With her, the mother and baby would stay. Separated by hundreds of miles and COVID-19, the collective member told her she could call him anytime and he would be there. This story is not an isolated one, nor will we need to be touched by it to know its severity and its wide reach. In this, multiple people are affected, not simply the recipient of violence. We've turned our attention to a series of tightly braided issues in our communities, in our world, under the topic of gendered intimate household violence. For all members of this collective, a topic such as this was a tough one to face. We, like the families and communities to which we belong, must confront. And that's no easy task. We have begun to do so, and again, we invite you to join us. Blacklash, the Africana Collective, BTAC, engages in interdisciplinary research to provide analysis and recommendations on a wide range of issues affecting the Africana world, linked communities with people of African ancestry. Using our collective knowledge and skills, as well as our grounding as thinkers, educators, activists, organizers, and parents, our objective is to support and inform action towards safeguarded humane development throughout the African world. We are independent in our funding, research, and directives, allowing us to work decidedly in the best interests of said communities. Each month, we consider one topical issue as a collective. In the process, we prepare individual statements, meet virtually to hammer out our findings, and then we prepare our report. That report is then shared with the African world via online outlets. As you all see, the link is posted there, and through various networks a week prior to the town hall meeting, where we invite members of the African world community to join us, debate, agree and disagree, and come away with perspectives that inform collective action. We strongly request that all attendees at this town hall and all our others read the report beforehand. We're still working on making sure that the paper circulates more widely. This way, you are an active participant in shaping your own views and subsequent decisions. We encourage you to sign up or register for the town hall so we may keep you abreast of upcoming events, key resources, and ways to translate the report's ideas into collective betterment, scaled to wherever you are and with whom you have to work. In this thought paper, report number 3, we consider the topical issues surrounding debates about gendered intimate household violence. All right, so I'm going to, family and community, invite our first collective member, Brother Todd Burrows, to share his perspective, his paper, his report with y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Yele. This was a painful process for all of us, and I want to emphasize that we had some difficulty in organizing our thoughts because so much of intimate violence that we're going to discuss tonight, really we are affected by, and affected by personally, either by 1 degree or two. My paper was a bit different because I kind of, you know, when I try to get personal, I kind of retreat into my media scholar, journalist gaze, because that allows me to have some distance so that I can examine some things. So I was kind of forced into that, because although I don't personally know anybody who's publicly been a victim of violence, in terms of my own inner circle, I mean, that doesn't mean that that has not happened, right? That does not mean that it is somewhere existing in a state of invisibility. And it was invisibility that I felt like doing a theme around, because I had read an article on a Black news website that rewrites other articles about, how, and this is how they put it: 7,000 Malayan, from the African country Malay, Maw. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Malawi.
Malawi. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. 7,000 Malawi children, between the ages of 10 and maybe 17, as they said, had become pregnant as a result of COVID-19. And I was just flabbergasted, as in, okay, wait a minute, 7,000 children don't become pregnant. That's a very neutral term that doesn't deal with the fact that obviously, if they're underage, they have been either engaged in sexual activity that they should not have been, or they had been raped. Now, the context of the article said, well, as a result of COVID, they were not able to go to school, so this happened, as if it's some neutral thing. And that drove me back crap. I mean, I just couldn't believe that. Because, first of all, 7,000 European children anywhere, if they had gotten pregnant, would be the number one story around the world. And not only was this article kind of ultra objective about it, it even then started listing the problems of young women in other countries, in other African countries. And I'm thinking, like, okay, well, why are we not screaming about this at the top of our lungs? Why are we not doing anything about this? And why are these men and boys not given some sort of punitive situation? And it reminded me of an article I had read 30 years ago that was really, my introduction to feminist thought. An article by Joan Morgan, a writer who I wish was still writing at this point. She wrote this article that was so powerful, it got her the job at Vibe magazine, and people really don't know that. She wrote this article called "The Black Woman's Guide to the Tyson Trial" for the Village Voice. And this article, excuse me, sorry, my phone's ringing here. This article, talked about the Mike Tyson rape trial. And Joan Morgan, kind of did an informal interview, talking to her conscious friends in Brooklyn, including her male friends. And she realized that, for many Black men, what they saw as blurred lines, women saw as being raped, to the point where even one or two of them said, well, talking about the definition of rape, well, if that's rape, well, I guess I've raped someone then. And so this idea of silence, because that only came up because she brought it up, right? The only reason I'm bringing this up is because I saw this article. Had I not seen this article, this would not have been brought up. Because these 7,000 Malawi children who got raped did not make CNN or anything else. It was, again, a rewritten website of an African news website. And they were, oh, well, the minister said this, as if, they had gotten COVID instead of gotten raped. So it just reminded me of how this invisibility is so serious, and that the invisibility is joined with silence. In fact, in this particular case, it seems as if silence and invisibility are the same thing. And who's punished are the children. I mean, of course, of both genders. But you know, the violence against African women by all men and boys is, you know, something that is historical and terrible. And the particular instance I'm talking about, and the invisibility and the silence of it, shows how far we have to go in terms of honoring and respecting Black womanhood and African womanhood and girlhood across the world. And so that's basically what I wrote. And I talked about how we had to set up some sort of mechanism, not for truth and reconciliation, because you know that gets people off, but you know, something that deals with restorative justice and education. If you know, at the very least, I mean, at the very most, you know, we should be talking about who's going to jail, right? And that's clarity. But I asked for the most general thing first to try to generate the conversation, and so that's basically what I wrote.
Thank you for that, Brother Todd. And Brother Todd will also be manning the chat and
I'm going to the chat right now.
The ask a question feature. So if you have questions, pointed questions, put them in ask a question. If you have comments, please, we'll be watching, all of us, I hope, will be watching the scrolling chat. Okay, so next I would like to invite Sister Diva Prewak to give us her thoughts and the general ideas found in her paper. Unmute yourself.
Completely talking to myself. I'm sorry. It's late in Ghana. I apologize. So I want to give a couple of points, about 4 or 5 critical points. And I know I have about 5 minutes, and so I'll be really brief. But I started out my paper talking about 2 women. One woman in South Africa in July that was murdered and found behind her boyfriend's house under garbage. And as her grandmother wailed at the site of where her granddaughter's body was found, she said that South African women, she said that we're expendable, right? Interestingly enough, about this case, the boyfriend was arrested, let go because there was a lack of evidence for the outcry to then have him rearrested. So as we in July were sort of reeling from this brutal killing of women in South Africa, and I believe it's every 4 hours or every 7 hours a woman is killed in South Africa. There's some crazy statistic. And I'm not downing South Africa, because in India, women are killed. I mean, women are killed everywhere, every single day. But as we're thinking about that, in DC, I believe in Southeast DC, a young 7-year-old is wandering the halls of his apartment complex. Come to find out his mother is missing. His mother's boyfriend arrested, charged with her death, and the body still has not been found. All within 10 days of each other. And so the question becomes, what does that say about the lives of African women? What does that say about the personal, collective, and individual responsibility as African people that we have to addressing household gender violence or gender-based violence? And so when I'm thinking about this question of, gendered household violence, I begin to ask myself 2 things. One, we recognize that gender is socially constructed. We also recognize that capitalism and patriarchy are systems of exploitation. And we recognize that both African men and African women have been exploited. And so we realize in spaces of war, violence against women is commonplace. So in the Congo, for example, 1 in 4 women will be raped in her lifetime. The Congo isn't a civil war. When we begin to look at war-like tactics, the rape and murder of women and children is commonplace. So we could explain it away. But then we have to at some point say, is that some level of naivete that we can blame violence against African women on war or violence against African women on patriarchy or capitalism? How is it that some men participate in violence against women in their household and others do not, right? How is it that we somehow, we see potential violence against women and we do nothing? And so I'm just kind of questioning, although we recognize that gender is socially constructed, and although we recognize that capitalism and patriarchy are both exploitative systems which negatively impact both men and women, at what point do we say we must stop and we must recognize that violence against African women, regardless of external factors, must be addressed internally to the community? And so I just have a couple of points, and then I will, Sister Ayele, and then I will move on, if that's okay with you. The first question is, we recognize that violence is part and parcel of the social construction of gender. So we can't leave out this global sort of macro perspective around gender, right? Gender-based violence. But we also recognize, and we recognize it is directly connected to the exploitation of women, lack of resources for both men and women. But then we must ask ourselves, is this a class question? Do we find, mass amounts of exploitation, violence against women in spaces where there's lack of access to resources? We don't know the question of that. And then the other point that I have that I think is particularly interesting is that in our community, we view victims of gendered violence inside their households as helpless. Often we view them as misguided. We view them as without agency. And I'm wondering if women, in this case, always are without agency. Are they always helpless? Have they made a critical decision to stay in violent situations, for example, because they're economically dependent on men in that household? Because if they don't stay in that condition, their children don't eat, right? So we have to look beyond this question of the helpless victim. And lastly, I'll just say two things. Toxic masculinity is running rampant in our community. And toxic masculinity is absolutely fueling this gender-based violence against women. And then when we begin to think about gender-based violence against African women, we can't run away from the fact that first of all, culture is dynamic, and so it's ever changing, right? And so your culture changes based on who you engage with, based on who you don't engage with, based on your historical events, based on your geography, based on your economy, based on your political system, right? But we also must recognize that there are elements of African culture which are ultimately celebrating in silence, celebrating violence against women. And let me just give you a quick example and then I'll finish. I was teaching a class of undergraduate students, and this was the final midterm exam. It was in class exam. And one of my students said, Doc, please, can I talk to you outside? I said, sure, what's going on? She comes outside in complete disarray. Now, mind you, I'm in Ghana, it's hot, and she's got a scarf around her neck. I don't ask why she has a scarf around her neck, but everybody who knows women who walk with scarves in heat, there's a contradiction. And I said, what happened? Oh, I'm having some personal issues, some issues in the family. Well, what issues are you having in the family? Last night, I got into a fight with my husband and he choked me out. Okay, she takes off the scarf and you can see the choke next. I said, okay, fine, the choke mark. I said, okay, fine, so what have you done? Have you gone to report him? Have you done what? I've had a conversation with my family and my family wants me to stay with him. My family wants to go and talk with his family and ultimately talk to him about his behavior and wants me to stay in the relationship. This is one of many conversations that I've had around gendered, intimate household violence. What is it in African culture, both in the continent and outside the continent? What is it inside African culture that we have allowed gendered, intimate household violence to be acceptable? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Mjiba. Next, I think we're going to bring up Brother Kwesi Konadu to talk about his paper and his thoughts on this topic as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Sister Haley, and greetings, everyone. Good to see you all returning, and those who are certainly joining us. So my focus, ironically, given Njiba's initial presentation, is centered around family, and I want to push back a bit, not on my colleagues, but push back on the idea of gender itself. I think there's some things that we assume about gender, and in some ways we unconsciously play into it. So for instance, thus far, from both my male and female colleague, and it pains me to say that because those are the only words I have in English to say these things. If I was speaking another language, I wouldn't, frame my ideas that way. But I'm literally operating in a gendered language, and so this is how I think how deep, but also how the everyday violence of our idioms and our syntax is just layered with violence against women. And so for me, the idea of gender has to be put on the chopping block, has to be put on trial, because that idea is laced with a number of assumptions. One idea is that only women are gendered and not men. And so when my young children, 10 and 12 now, when they were younger, they used to pounce on me, punch me, kick me, jump on my back. And I'm sure Brother Jared knows something about that. And the idea was that men don't feel pain. And I'm wondering, where did my daughters get that from? It wasn't from my wife and I, but somehow they have become convinced that only girls and women are emotional, and men are the stoic block of painless masculinity. And because they don't feel pain, it means that they don't have emotional lives to be respected or to be given due. And as such, we think that matters of emotion, such as nurturing, pregnancy, menstrual cycle, those are all signs of weakness. And so I remember somewhere around age 9 or 10, boys stop being boys. They realize they have a penis. They realize that what they have is different than the girls. They realize that if they cry, it's a sign of weakness and it's vaginal. They realize that they go through this rites of passage of being, punched in the chest, of being pounced on, of being told to suck it up, to hold it in. And I really, wonder, rhetorically, because I know the answer, about what does that do to, the whole being of these boys that are looking to be men, but that are somewhat suspended in this liminal place, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, when they become fathers and husbands and kin to, and even neighbors, right, to our folks. And so the idea of gender sets all that up, because it lays out for us certain assumptions, assumptions such as even intimacy, right, which is a part of our topic, in the sense that, when I talk to brothers in the streets or in the park where I play basketball, and or even in the, outside the classroom, and they're talking about intimacy, the language is laced with violence. I'm gonna smash that. I'm gonna hit that, right? and we all know this because we've heard it. Either the recipient of it or we've actually traded in these words. And what I'm saying is that it's not just wordplay. What it does, it begins to, animate our reality and begins to condition our behaviors in ways that we have, I think, rarely tapped or recognized the full extent of it. Or you walk into a room and I've seen male professors, we walk into a room full of women and he will say, "How are you guys doing?" As if they don't exist, right? And they'll respond, right? "We're doing fine." And so I'm saying the ways in which gender, bleeds into the ideas, into the idioms, into the language, into the very vocabulary, into our heads, does have a way that it actually, provides a, layers, for us to work through. But I think family is that sort of catch-22 that is both the place where these kind of violence is enacted both against boys, men, and against women and girls. And I want to put it in family because, when I read, I'm sure we have read these books by these authors about whether we should focus on, protecting our Black boys or protecting our girls. And I'm saying it's neither. It has to be both. I don't believe in the rule of women or in the rule of men. I believe in the rule of both. That it has to be the sort of, non-taboo, crossing the waters, if you will, where collectives of women and girls and collectives of men and boys actually talk to each other, actually, work through things to each other. Because, and I close on this, and I'm sure Jared can relate because he's the other husband here, is that every year, every summer, every few months, I discover, and I learn so much, through my wife. And I used to say to her, well, I wish I knew that. I wish you all just tell me this, the things that you all, when I say you all, that sisters, have to move through the world with. And even when, I think brothers like myself who try to, walk in partnership with, there's a lot that I said, I wish you just tell me. But she tells her friends, and I'm not saying nothing wrong with that. I'm saying it's both, that the sisterhoods are necessary, and I support that fully. But I think we have to cross that other threshold and begin to, have these kinds of, very close, opening, safe place where we can bleed together, because there are many, men that are trapped in boyhood, that are trapped in the same kind of socialization that I've just described, that are waiting to be men, but there's no cue, there's no course, there's no, passage for which they can travel through to get there. And in that suspended animation, they, as Njimba mentioned, they use the tools of the state. They reenact it, in their households. So I'll pause there, and we can do some of the Q&A.
Thank you for that, Brother Quincy. Next, I will invite Brother Jared Ball to share his thoughts in his paper with us. Thank you.
Peace, everybody, and thanks to my colleagues and comrades here, and to everybody else. And as has been said already, this was a very difficult topic. I struggled and microaggressed against myself with procrastination, and in some ways feel like I copped out. And I admit that in the essay I wrote, and I'll say it here, that while I agree with the points I made and will make here, and I think it's important, I feel like on some level, because so much of our personal lives and our relationships go undiscussed or under-discussed, in some ways rightly so, a lot of things that go on in families and relationships don't get talked about, and I think not talked about fully, and in many ways not incredibly honestly either. But in the end, I went to my professional default and looked at and made a little media analysis of why I think some of all of this still occurs. Anyway, so that said, I did so by relaying a story that I can't really get over. It was that occurred when I was chaperoning my oldest daughter's 6th grade outdoor education overnight trip, 6th grade trip. And it's interesting to so many avenues that I can't, I'm not qualified to get into, but what Brother Quasi was just saying about how we're all gendered and all of that needs to be investigated. The way we were split up, just because I'm a man, I could be with my daughter's group during the day and all the activities, but once it was nighttime and bedtime, the women went with and I went with the boys who were being chaperoned by someone else. And I was not technically a chaperone. I was not technically in any real authority. I did not know a lot of the boys who I ended up sleeping in this cabin with. We only saw each other right at night, lights out, and then just early in the morning as we were preparing to leave. But the second evening, as people were after lights out, getting ready for bed, a lot of the young boys were still just staying awake and, talking, and then eventually rhyming, and started to perform a lot of the popular lyrics, or lyrics that they were they all knew, which were very vulgar. And even though I grew up on hip hop, and I'm getting older now, and my sensitivities, I'm a parent, and all this now, I'm getting soft or whatever. But as they kept going, I did get a little more uncomfortable. I started texting a friend of mine and started asking, what should my role here be? The other chaperone, whose son was in the room, was obviously not getting involved. Anyway, so as it started to escalate, at one point, one of the young boys started to name the girls that he wanted to perform these incredibly vulgar acts upon. And to Kwesi's point, it was a lot of that same language. Who do I want to smash and hit and punish and destroy and all this kind of. And I admit, initially it was selfish. I thought I can't let him get to the point where he mentions my daughter's name, and I can't. At which point I can't be responsible for my reaction. So I just sat up and I just sort of just said, and it was in the darkness, so nobody could really see anybody. And I sat up and I just said, hey, everybody, and I tried to keep it light. And I just said, listen, I understand how you all feel. I understand the hormones. I understand the emotions. I understand you're out for the first time for many of you late at night, blah, blah, blah. I understand that you're talking about these lyrics that you think are pointing you in directions where you think you understand what you're talking about. But let me just say for one thing, first of all, these girls that you're starting to talk about are human beings. They're not here for your fantasy. They're not your playthings. And one of the boys at one point stopped and said, well, who are you? Like, whose father are you? And I said, and in that moment, I just said, I'm everybody's father, because I didn't want any specific association. I certainly didn't want anybody at that moment to start thinking about my children, and I certainly didn't want anybody's child to be, felt to be fair game because they weren't claimed in that moment, so to speak. So I just said, I'm everybody's father, and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody should be talked about what I was trying to say was, look, I understand, and I know what it's like to be your age and to be talking trash and acting like I knew what I was talking about and going off of lyrics that I may enjoy musically, but I really didn't know anything about. Just remember that these girls are going through their own version of this, and they're human beings, and it's not wise, it's not safe, it's not smart to approach them as, these objects or these, the one part I didn't put in the essay that I'll just wrap up by saying here that I thought was kind of powerful and should have gone in the essay is that the next morning, one of the young boys came over to me in the light of day as everybody was getting ready, and he had this look in his face of just desperation. He actually said to me, he said, by then I had identified myself. He said, Mr. Ball, how did you get through this? Like, it was like how did you make it through this puberty, and how did you make it through this time? And I just started laughing, but I said to him, look, man, I said, in many ways, I made a lot of the same mistakes. I didn't have the guidance, I went off, I was learning about manhood from music and videos and movies and whatever other kids were doing and people in the streets were doing, or wherever I was out doing, were doing. And so I just want to try to, give you a little bit of game, a little bit of information now that I would have liked to have had said to me when I was your age. And just try to remember what you're going through is normal. It's natural. And I think I've said something about maybe try to expand your music, whatever. But my real point was that in the context we're in, this colonial hostile context, media are taking a position. They are weaponized intentionally in very psychological warfare, black ops style methods. And a lot of this is done intentionally to create a confusion and division and to implant certain ideas and distract from others, particularly among our youth. And it is encouraging often. And as I pointed out in the example that I put in the essay, one of the more popular tracks out right now is hyper violent, and being, downloaded and streamed almost, 470 million times. And this is reaching a lot of our young people, and consciously or not encouraging them to some of the violent behavior that we end up trying to deal with on this end. So I'll stop there, but that was sort of how I approached this. And again, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Jared. So I'm going to wrap up our opening presentations with my own paper, and then we will get into the discussion from there, guys. So as was said by the other collective members, this was a struggle. One of the reasons why you probably haven't seen our report until now is because we were all really struggling with this paper. I just didn't want to write it. I really found it difficult. And one of the reasons was because I felt almost emotionally drained and exhausted from having these kinds of conversations on social media, on Facebook, et cetera, ad nauseum, but always coming away feeling worse than when I put the issue on the table. And so at the top of my paper, I said, I struggle to write this. Our community is ill. And I feel like Black men and women are shouting at each other from opposite sides of some sort of big fault line that's really dividing our community. And it's, again, I heard the angry voices and angry posts and angry responses from Black men, on my timeline. As I tried to write this down, I kept freezing, literally like sitting here typing and freezing. And it's not to say that this is the only thing. I mean, there are Black women who also have some really angry responses. Black women who bring up the issue of domestic violence, gendered violence, particularly violence directed at Black women, are thought of by some as traitors to the race. You're airing our dirty laundry. You're trying to be divisive. You're trying to tear down the Black men, et cetera, et cetera. Don't we have enough to deal with, right? And so I had to really try to stifle those voices in my head in order to write down some thoughts. And again, I'm still struggling with what's here. But the first thing I tried to do in my paper is speak broadly about data. The statistics are alarming as it relates to gendered, or specifically female gendered, feminine gendered violence for Black women. We've probably at this point, and the last I checked, it was like 389 Black women have been killed in the United States by an intimate partner. And that was, I think that number is from April. So we're in August, right? So that's alarming. The 7,000 girls between the ages of 10 and 17 in Malawi who are pregnant, that's alarming. The mild language with which we speak about these things and the fact that there's not this public outrage is alarming. I kept hearing the voice of Brother Malcolm X in my head, where he said the Black woman is the most unprotected person in America, the most disrespected person in America, the most neglected person in America, right? So that was the only thing that really gave me enough strength to get through it. And that, being that he made this observation in his lifetime, right? Someone who had not only existed in Africa and in other countries, in college classrooms and university auditoriums, but who had existed in the streets and who had seen all kinds of cross sections of our people doing life. And this was one of his takeaways. This was something that he felt was important to speak with when engaging us on the topic of who are we and who taught us to hate ourselves, right? So, so the next thing I did in the paper was talk about the detractors, right? People who wish to kind of divert us from my specific point of entry, my specific topic, which is, folks who kind of are like, what about Black men and boys who are also being abused? There is no one who would ever be able to tell you that I want to detract from that or minimize that issue or act like it's not as important, right? The statistics on Black boys who suffer domestic violence and sexual abuse is also staggering, right? So we don't want to deny that. But I think that the invisibility that Brother Todd mentioned, and the trap, the gender trap that men and boys are subject to, that Brother Kwesi brought up, the most tragic part is that I believe boys and men suppress their own suffering, suppress their own moments of victimization, their own incidents in their lives because of those same pressures and because of that same gender box that they must live in. So that definitely does need to be put on the table. I think there's another group of detractors who are kind of like, well, Black men feel powerless and that's why they act out. It's colonialism, it's white supremacy, it's capitalism, and this is why they beat women, they rape women, they kill women. You know, the rage, and we've just got to understand that that's where it comes from. And to them, I would say Black women have dug into our patients for many, many years because we know that, because of the acknowledgement of the pressures of being a Black male gendered person. But in the meantime, asking us to wait and not do anything about what we're suffering is also asking us to suffer and die while we're waiting for Black men to be healed. So the last part, the last question that is typically raised is why are we trying to start a gender war with this, feminist nonsense? And again, to a point that Kwesi made that was so important, our leadership should be masculine and feminine. Otherwise, we're not heading anywhere. If Black women and girls are devalued in the world, in South Africa, in the United States, in Malawi, what hope do we have of winning a war? The wars we have won have been wars in which Black women and girls have been participants, active participants. We can talk about the Haitian Revolution. We can talk about all kinds of anti-colonial wars in the continent of Africa. We can talk about the teachings of Thomas Sankara. We can talk about the ancient wisdom that flows through the Ifa corpus and other bodies of African sacred knowledge, and really understand. We should come away with the understanding that without the liberation, the protection, the respect and honoring of African women and girls, the war the external war cannot be won. And so this is not an attempt to start a gender war. This is an attempt to deal with an issue that prevents us from having the unity that we need, the health, the balance that we need, access to all of the resources, the human resources, the clear thought, the healthy bodies and minds that we need in order to win that external battle. So I thought about why we might have strayed away from this wisdom that we've had. But, again, we know colonialism, Western and other types of imperialism, Abrahamic religions, we can talk about that. But I tried to end the paper by posting some solutions. One of the things that I know is that this has to be community-based. This is why this is such an important topic for us to speak with you all about in the community. One of the other solutions, one of the other approaches is pooling our cultural resources, using all of our cultural tools that we have towards healing. I recall having a session in which one of my IAs, one of my spiritual advisors and mentors for many, many years, came to a college campus that I was teaching at, and she did readings for probably 30 of my female students, my women students. And it was because she came to speak to the African American women's history class, and most of them were African American women. Okay. And she just sat in my office and did readings for the rest of the night. They just lined up. We sat in my office on the floor and ate food while everyone was waiting. We did it village style. Like if you've gone home to the continent, people don't have privacy sometimes when they get readings. Everybody just, your business is there, right? So what I discovered then was the majority of my women students had faced some sort of domestic violence or sexual abuse. Like by the end of the night, she was exhausted and she was like, I got to do a spiritual bath. I have to come and take all of these young women to somebody's river and wash them and pray over them and help them, and obviously each of these sessions is like counseling as well. Like if we really think about it and try to take the cultural and spiritual and put it into kind of like this more modern kind of Western therapeutic understanding or language. There's this counseling going on, and then there's the spiritual stuff with the bathing. She's like, they need a bath. Like this is too much. But this same priestess has gone to multiple college campuses with me at different schools that I've taught at and come away with the same conclusion, guys. It is a crisis. It is a crisis. And we all need a bath, right? So again, I'm not saying that that's the only thing you can do, right? You can't wash away experiences, but we have counselors, we have therapists, we have priests, we have people who do energy work and body work, and people who organize and people who educate, and we have to use all of those resources to their full effect and not be afraid to do so. We have to create safe space in which to talk about these issues. This is a start, right? And we have to also support people who want to intervene, who want to get to the victims, get to the situations directly, right? Because we can intellectualize about this, and all of that needs to happen. We definitely need to revisit our understandings of gender and all of the baggage that we've inherited or has been imposed on us. But one of the things that I see happening is there are many, many people who would like to intervene or who have intervened, and they incurred a lot of great personal risk, some damage from trying to intervene when they see these things happening, because they are isolated and alone, and because we don't solve problems as collectives anymore, but we used to. And there's a history of that. There's a history of groups of men getting together and going to protect women's bodies and homes and children and protect their other brothers when they're in situations. And I think we really have to kind of study those models of organizing and infuse that into the other types of political organizing that we do, right? I mean, because again, we're always focused on the external enemy, but you could be sleeping. There are Black people today who are sleeping next to their enemy in their home. The person who has the most direct hand in the destruction of their lives is sharing the bed with them. And we have to think about how we use the organizing space that we have, use all these wonderful books that we read and these ideas that we're privy to really create direct action that can't wait for us to finish intellectualizing, can't wait for African people to get liberated from whatever we feel we're trying to get liberated from, because some of us won't make it for reasons that just should not be. I'm going to stop there. And I think unless any of our collective members would like to kind of jump back in with a specific comment or reaction to someone else's paper, I want to open it up for the chat and or the ask a question feature. I see we have at least three questions. Go ahead. Todd, do we want to do a question? Okay, is it me? Okay, so someone raised a question for Sister Mdiba. Do we know that these issues of toxic manhood are particular to our communities?
Yeah, I feel like that's an excellent question, and it's not. Like patriarchy is not like just an African thing. Toxic masculinity is not just an African thing. And so I think that we have to like recognize that. I think that's an excellent point, Jared. I think Jared raised that question, is that it's not like, this is just something that happens in the African community. I mean, there's the same type of toxic masculinity throughout the world. There's the same type of patriarchy is a global, it's part of this global sort of system. I mean, it's institutionalized in many of our institutions. And so what you tend to have sort of women triply oppressed by race, class, and gender, right? And we're oppressed from a gender perspective, both in the larger society, as well as, I just almost spilled my tea, as well as in the African nation. And I think that's where it becomes problematic, is because while we have these external enemies that we know are oppressing women from race, class, and gender, one would question why we're now replicating inside the African community this gender oppression. And let me just say this, that I think Kwesi said something, and I'll finish after this, but there was a couple things I think that were said that were particularly significant. Quincy mentioned this question of gender and how gender, we need to even just question this concept of gender, which is why I also mentioned that gender is socially constructed, right? Gender is not something that just falls out of the sky and everyone knows what the gender is. I mean, gender is constructed based on power. It's constructed based on access to political power and economic power, right? It's constructed based on patriarchy. I mean, patriarchy is a system where men rule, right? Men rule in the family, men rule community, and men also rule, at the national level. And we also have to be honest and say that, as you mentioned, sister, that young boys are being abused, and there's gender-based violence in the home against young boys. Trans women are being killed indiscriminately. I mean, so there are all of these other gender-based atrocities that are impacting our community. And I think that and I just want us to say that the reason why we're not tackling all of those, because they all have specific circumstances and nuances, right? Because abuse of a boy, and oftentimes this is, in some cases, sexual abuse, that's a different conversation than domestic violence, right? As critical and as devastating to everyone involved, but you're talking about a different set of circumstances and nuances. And so I'm saying all this to say that toxic masculinity is not is certainly not just an African thing. It's not limited to the African community. But I think as African people, we need to begin to ask ourselves, how is it that patriarchy has invaded our culture, and how have we allowed it to invade our culture, right? Because it always hasn't been this drastic. So there was a shift somewhere, right? I mean, I'm not South African, and I did not grow up in South Africa, but I did not hear as many instances of rape and murder of South African women 30 years ago. What changed, right? Is there something that has changed? And how can we attribute that change? And then the other question becomes, how is it that some men participate in gender-based violence against women and others don't? Is there something that we have to interrogate about why that is the case? And I'm not talking men as in one man from one place and one man from another. I'm talking men who could even live and be friends and live next to each other. So is there an element of culture that is allowing us to accept this type of behavior, right? And as women, are we also reinforcing this behavior? And that's the other thing, is let's not confuse. Women are not absolved of any behavior. We are part and parcel of patriarchy. We are impacted by patriarchy as well. That's just what I want to say.
Go ahead.
Can I? Yeah, I just wanted to say just very quickly, this issue of violence, I think at least one, I think that the issue of violence needs to be extended beyond just physical. So Mjiba, when you say that not all of us engage in violence against women, the first thought I have is, one, well, the question with propaganda is intent, not impact or effect. So the goal, I would argue, in many ways, is to create a situation where we would go in that direction, as opposed to think about healing. So the fact that not all of us do it shouldn't make us diminish the intent. But the other part of the question is, the other thing is, when you say that not all of us engage in physical violence, to what extent do the numbers get skewed when verbal hostilities are included? Anyway,
Absolutely.
That was all I did. I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I didn't mean to cut in, but I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I want to.
And economic violence also.
Economic violence, financial violence, right? And that actually goes back to the point you made, Mjiba, about women who choose to stay because they're financially dependent on their abuser, right? And I wanted to raise a rejoinder type question. I was just thinking of an incident I saw a couple of weeks ago, and I think I may have written about this on my Facebook page, but I saw a sister struggling with a really heavy box, taking it into the Amazon place to, return something. And she parked her car in a way that only allowed a narrow way for you to drive through past her car. You could get through, but it was narrow. Some black man gets out of his car and starts screaming at her, calling her everything but a child of God, threatening to kill her, threatening to hit her with his car. He just flipped. He just raged out on this woman. And there were all kinds of other people around, multiple other black men around. And none of them was helping her with the box, right? If we're thinking about chivalry as something that we are okay with, right? But she was obviously struggling. Like, no human helped her, right? With this box. And she's like halfway up the stairs being cussed out and screamed at and threatened. And so it really made me think about the idea that even if this man never put hands on this woman, he has exacted a ridiculous and just an outrageous amount of violence on her life in a public setting. And there were no consequences. He literally got in his car and drove through and just went about his life, right? No one checked him. No one said, hey, brother, that's, back up. That's not okay. None of that. They just kind of put their heads down and kept going. And so there are all kinds of violence there's levels and types that we're all very, we seem comfortable with. Now, as a person, I actually tend to intervene with stuff like that. I mean, I actually passed her by and was like, kind of, his shouting made me stop my car, But then I was like, this is my own personal safety. So I didn't intervene, and I thought these other people who were close and bigger in body, and, I was like, they should intervene, But these are the situations that I see all of the time. And my question is about the difference between people, like an academic understanding of toxic masculinity and kind of a lay person's understanding. Mm-hmm. Like, and I hate to use that term, but understanding of toxic masculinity, because I think to some degree there is a level of frustration I sense among some women where, like, really all masculinity is seen as toxic. There's not a lot of nuance, there's not a lot of sophistication. It's just like, if you're being what people think of as masculine, it's probably a problem. So where is the line? How do we define toxic masculinity in a way in which men themselves don't just reject the concept out of hand? You know what I mean? Because I think that's another thing. On the other end of that is men saying, you all just use toxic masculinity as this like meaningless catch-all to just hate on men. So what is it? What is toxic masculinity? Where do we draw the line? And what's regular masculinity? What does that look like?
Maybe one of these brothers can talk about regular masculinity, but I don't know. But I think honestly, I agree with you because honestly, and I don't mean any harm, but nowadays everything is patriarchal. Everything is a toxic masculinity. Everything is you're benefiting from patriarchy because you took 3 donuts and I only had 2 donuts, right? I'm not trying to be like funny, but really that's what it is. And so what happens is, and you see these debates on Twitter and on Facebook and in different sort of spaces where it begins to be difficult to determine, well, geez, what is the difference between struggling with someone and toxic masculinity, right? And like for me, for example, like if I'm struggling, and I'll use this from a comrade perspective, because I have personally dealt with a lot of patriarchal behavior in organizations in which I'm in, right? But there's a difference between me struggling with you, Jared, as a comrade, and we don't agree. And we're struggling intimately. That doesn't mean that you're being patriarchal because you're struggling with me from an intimate perspective. Or from a very, strong perspective. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're patriarchal. But you become patriarchal when you dismiss my behavior, when you dismiss my ideas, when you publicly disrespect me, when we're in a meeting and, for example, I say something and no one, it's not relevant or important at all. And then Kwesi says it and the world drops. You become, it's toxic masculinity when, as women, we are talked to in ways which, and I know this is about to sound touchy-feely, but which feels kind of like wrong. You know what I mean? And I'll give you an example. Back in the day, I'll say back in the day, it's not anytime soon. I was dating this brother very briefly, and we got into a fight, a struggle on the phone. And I said to myself, if this African was in front of me, he'd have knocked me out. Like you get that feeling that like, yo, this African is angry. And if this African was in my face, I would be fighting for my life right now. That's toxic masculinity, sister. Toxic masculinity is not, I have a partner and we're arguing, we're struggling over something. We raise our voice, we get angry, we get animated. That's not necessarily toxic masculinity in itself. Because as humans, men have the right to engage in debates and struggles from a very animated or passionate perspective. And so that didn't answer the question, but I'm just saying that there's both a feeling and then there's also the question about what is it, and defining it, I think is a really important point. That's it. I didn't answer the question. I talked all over the place. I apologize.
Thank you. That's a really important addition. I wanted to also just amplify one of the comments. Christopher brought up that he says that I think the shift is Abrahamic religion is a safe place for rapists, pedophiles, and abusers, but we feel the dismantling that institution is off the table. So instead we accommodate rape culture. So, it could be argued that this is just the ocean we're swimming in as colonial or colonized subjects. The sexual ocean, the perverse ocean, etc. And I'm going to come back to that because Jared posed a question specifically for me about a Facebook post I made recently, but I wanted to get to some of the other questions that were posed earlier. I got it. I got the question. I wanted to come to another of Jared Ball's questions. And I think this one probably is directed more toward Kwesi, but it says, does Tommy Curry's work mean something in here? I hear Kwesi's point about it being about both, but both genders, I'm assuming, but is it true that Black men and boys are often marginalized in much of what passes this conversation on these issues? Are they marginalized in conversations about domestic violence?
And let me just say real quick, while it wasn't necessarily directed to Kwesi, obviously I'm happy to hear from him. I also brought it up because Brother Curry was on my Facebook page asking if we were going to talk about that today. So while of course I invited him and others to be here, I did want to at least have us directly speak to that subject area.
Okay, so yes, I'm familiar with Tommy Curry's work and a few others, and those who check out our collective report will kind of see some of the resources we put together, both web resources, literature, as well as a number of programs that are happening that Sister Njibo is kind enough to share with us. And so there's a number of resources packed into that report, and we asked folks to check it out, including Tommy Curry's book, The Man Not. So my point about not necessarily directly, but indirectly about Curry's work is that what he's doing is much like what the vindicationist scholars like C.L.R. James, John Henry Clark, Du Bois, and others were doing. That is to tell white folks that we also have a history, right? And to tell many of the people who study gender and intersectionality that they are missing the study of Black males and boys. And so his was a theoretical, but also historically grounded intervention. He's a philosopher by training, and so that's part of the packaging. And his work is very important because what it does, it just highlights some of the things that we have touched on already, which is that if you put the statistic aside, there is a ample enough amount of suffering on both sides of the African male and female, line. What I don't want to get into is this sort of combat sport that we fight about who's oppressed the most. Ayele said this early on in her opening statement about the kinds of rebuttals she gets, from brothers, and from sisters. There's a rebuttal that, well, Quasi, African women suffer from, 3 kinds of oppression, and so some of us are very quick to wear the sort of the gold medal that we're oppressed the most, more than, or we're oppressed more than you. And for me, that's defeatist. That for me is a dead end street, because there's so many ways to take this, but I'll take it one particular way, because you asked a question about, I'm not sure if I qualify for regular masculinity, but I will say this is that my approach is very simple. It is honesty. And you can't deal with suffering or deal with healing and therapy without honesty. All those things are contingent upon honesty. And in Jiba, I don't know the brother whom you're dealing with on the other end of the phone, but I doubt he was honest with himself and his emotions and whatever's going on in his life. I doubt it. I am very honest with my wife. Sometimes she doesn't appreciate that because she says I'm too honest. And, honesty doesn't have the same form, and it shouldn't, now it's not violent, but honesty is, I think, is a very sort of basic expectation we should also have in all our relationships, our intimate ones, our spousal ones, our, parent to child ones, our colleague and friendship ones. If the 4 of us and 5 of us, including Todd, can't be honest with each other, there's no collective. The collective is simply some idea. Some idea of an umbrella that we simply hold over our heads once a month, but then we dash back into our own, lives in whatever ways, that sort of metastasized. And so my base thing is just to be very honest in my weakness. My wife knows this. I will ask her questions. What do you think about this? I'm not sure about this. Well, what's your thoughts on this? Can I be honest with you? In fact, I'll give you an example from last night. And this fits directly into our topic. This is lived experience, folks. And Jared, this is a sort of insight we're talking about that we don't discuss. So last night, I'm talking to our youngest daughters. I'll leave them nameless for this public venue, but they're 10 and about to be 12, and they want a snack. Whether it's some vegan sorbet or some vegan icy. And I said, you should also have the icy because you had the sorbet yesterday, and it was very sweet, even though it's supposedly natural. And I said, and have it with water, and then, my wife intervened, and I said to her, we don't need the sarcasm. And then, I moved on to say that to them, the 2 of them, that I explained to them why they have to think through what they eat, especially when they're not with their parents, right? Fast forward. I go downstairs to do some work. My wife comes down. She's obviously upset. She's not smiling. She's obviously upset. And she comes to me and she accuses me of doing something. And I said to her, if you're going to accuse me of doing something, make the accusation precise. Tell me exactly what I said, because it matters. I said, I don't mind going on trial, but just tell me exactly what the charge is, right? Not what you think you're angry about, but precisely what I did so we can deal with it. She stormed back upstairs because she did not want to hear what she came downstairs to hear. And so I said, okay, now I'm, feeling away because I don't want my wife upset. And so, but I said, that can cool down. So I waited half an hour. I can't work because I lost my train of thought. There's no working happening. And this is what I want to say about the broad implications, that I'm affected by her being upset. I literally can't work anymore. I can't stomach the idea of doing something else. And so I go upstairs, I get ready for bed. I brush my teeth and I go to her. I said, can I talk to you? She said, sure. She's obviously much cooler now. And I explained to her, what I said and why I said it. I said there's nothing untrue about what I said. Is there something else, there that may upset you? And then we started talking, and that she revealed that yes, she thought she heard this. And I said, well, I said this because this is the case usually, and that's why I said this. Short story, bringing this together is that we were able to lead the conversation about what we're planning to do for the fall in terms of what they're going to eat, because they're going to be home on the online, schooling, that fraud called online schooling in the fall. And I said to say that the common denominator, what everything comes down to is just a sheer honesty. There was no ego in me. There was no, I must win at all costs. There was no emotional casualties. It was more that, that we have a thing that we should not go to bed and be angry with each other, right? And I'm saying those kinds of value-based sort of context allow us to do the hard work, because I don't know what mood she's in. I'm taking a big risk because she was not happy when she came downstairs. And so the risk is worth it when honesty is the ground floor.
Hey, what'd I do? Oh, I just changed my own screen. I wanted to invite anybody else who wanted to respond to that. Real quickly, I wanted to point out, like what it brought to mind and what Jared's paper also brought to mind was the issue of socialization of children. What I'm hearing and what you're saying, Casey, is that you were raised a certain way. You think a certain way about relationships and communication in those relationships. I don't know how common it is that people have those skills within relationships.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't mean to cut you off if that's the appearance, but I want to jump in real quick because I get that all the time, especially when I was an undergrad. My father is in Jamaica. He's always been in Jamaica. So I came to this country when I was 10, and I've been without my father since. So I really don't have growing with a father, but most people assume that, hey, you must have a very strong father and so on. I see my father once a year at best, and that's a visit. My mother, she was taken away from me by local authorities, institutions when I was 11. And my mother was in Bellevue Hospital in New York City. She's been floating in and out of homeless shelters. She's been homeless. She's lived with me when I can find her. And so I've been in foster care. I was awarded the state, my brother and I. And so I shared that little bit, about me because again, the calm down is honestly, this is what it is. So what I'm trying to say is that there's nothing exceptional about me. Is that, my thing has been, I remember taking money from my mother that she used to pay the rent. And I remember I was 10, 11. I remember her crying because that was violence, right? She was crying because I had taken a few dollars to go play Pac-Man and buy a slice of pizza when you could buy a slice of pizza for $1. And I came home, my mother was crying because that was the money for the rent that she had stashed away. And my brother, I had found it. I remember from that point on, I made a vow to myself that I'm not going to do this to my mother, but I'm not going to steal, because I saw my mother crying for the first time and it hurt me at 11 years old. And so I share that little bit again to say that there's nothing about upbringing, I've had bouts, years with neither parent. I think it really is just the community of people that I've been around, and just being honest with myself that, this is the kind of person that I want to be, being around the kinds of people that add to you rather than take away from your values or who you see yourself as being, and being very introspective and honest about it. I know my shortcomings because I'm very honest about it. So I think more than anything else is just really the value of just being very honest with oneself and just pushing yourself to grow. But I have not had the upbringing that people often assume that I have had. So I just wanted to interject that real quick.
Okay, well, you're just a unicorn, a really, really smart unicorn on this message. But no, but I mean, but that still doesn't negate the fact that socialization is important. And perhaps your way of doing things, if we consider that a more healthy approach, could be generalized. You know what I mean? Because we do have traditions around socializing children about communication and relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So we have, and again, the point was just that we need to teach them about how to be accountable and responsible for their own aggression, their own sexuality, and their own behaviors, right? Maybe that's something, you know, you can help people out with, you know, I'm just saying. I wanted to ask any of the other collective members if they wanted to say anything in response to this particular topic before I pull up the next question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I think that this question about violence and socialization, I mean, I think it goes beyond the individual, right? There's something, and I hate to go back to this, but we have to be honest. Like, there's some ideological components to our behavior, right? Because ideology is a set of ideas that like guide our actions, and so there's some ideological components to our behavior, and oftentimes we are not clear which ideology we are guided by. And this is a fundamental contradiction. If you don't know which ideology you're guided by, those behaviors, they dictate, that the ideology dictates your behavior. And so when you're looking at this capitalist sort of rampant individualist ideology, we begin to see that there's a breakdown as capitalism became more rampant. And we transitioned from having conversations about Africanizing our ideology and Africanizing our culture and Africanizing our institutions. You see that this capitalist ideology permeates our community. And then you also begin to see that these instances of violence also are becoming, you know, more and more. Not suggesting that they did not happen before, but there was some level of institutional and cultural nuances which dictated that this type of violence was not acceptable. And I think that that's important, you know. So like, and I'm thinking back to when I was the first time I came to Ghana in the 90s, and I was living by Achimota, whatever, going to Legon, and like me and some of my friends, we would go to this place called Golden Chicken, right? And we every day after school, we would go to Golden Chicken, we would get some chicken and some fried rice or some chicken and some chips, right? And we went there because they were always playing reggae music and it was all great, blah, blah, blah. So like one day, it was like about 6 o'clock, and out of nowhere, you see like a mob of brothers, like running up on this young man, maybe in his 20s, maybe 30s. And I'm like, what is happening? Somebody's about to get killed. Come to find out, this brother had, you know, participated in domestic violence against his wife. And the mob of people were, you know, brothers and uncles and, you know, friends and X, Y, and Z, were ultimately, you know, meting out community justice. I'm not suggesting that we should go be beating people up, you know, collectively, but I'm wondering at what point did this shift begin to happen? And then I'll finish after this, because I think that as a community, we underestimate the role and transformation of culture and how it transforms. And then also, you know, what Sekou Touré talks about in Revolution Culture and Pan-Africanism, and I hate to do this kind of what this person talked about, but he talked about society transforming as the individual transforms, right? And vice versa. And one is, you can't have one without the other. And so as society transforms in a negative way, you know, through capitalist ideology, your individual also transforms almost in that way, unless they have an alternate ideology to fight against this negative capitalist ideology. So again, I hate to take it there, but I want us to say this is not just individual, you know, MG, some guy in people was dating back in the day was talking crazy and he was about to beat me down, or, you know, so-and-so did X, Y, and Z. There's something more collective that we have to address. I mean, systematic, that's all.
Thank you. I want to go to the next question because it actually has a direct relationship to where you started your last comment, Njiba. Chris asked about rites of passage. How does the absence of African initiation and rites of passage processes contribute to producing Black abusers? So we've put the question of socialization on the table, communities either dealing with it in a preventive way or dealing with it in a corrective way, but is there a correlation? Is rites of passage a solution? And this is for everybody, obviously.
Jared, did you want to say something?
No, I have only a very tangential, indirect relationship with rights programs, so I'll leave that to the experts.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I will post an interview package we did about rights programs that people can follow up with. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have some experience with. I'm not an expert, but I have some working with, especially when I was in DC. Attending Howard, I had worked with the rites of passage through Nation House in Ancobia with the young men, for a number of years. And actually, big shout out to Baba Tiba, an elder who has done rites for decades there. And the short answer is no. I don't think this is a matter of rites of passage. If it is, it has to be rites of passage for, I don't know how many, we're 12% of the population in the United States. It has to be some massive processes that hit us at the atomic level, right? It has to push past the skin and push past the sort of performance that rights can have. As someone who actually worked hands-on with, every weekend working, in terms of these issues of male-female relationships, as well as taking care of oneself and the like, all those topics come up, and they're crucial, but they're too episodic in my view, right? They're not sustainable. It reminds me of the weekend warrior father, sees his child once a week, out of the month. It's not sustainable, nor I think it has the net positive effect. So unless someone can envision a rites of passage, meaning processes, sort of like take home community kits that people can enact in their own households and communities that could hit millions. Short of that, I just don't see anything there that pockets of people do in specific communities that will have a net positive effect.
Yeah, I think I can agree with what Kwesi says to the extent that it's just how do we create some sort of program that everybody in our community, everyone in the African community can follow and would be willing to follow, and how do we have agreement about what needs to be taught in the rights, how to make a man or make a woman, right? Which constructions of gendered adulthood are acceptable for us and which ones aren't. Although I wouldn't dismiss it off, outright. I mean, obviously there can be good, and I think there must be at least some sort of intentionality about socializing our children. Being that we live in a vulgarly individualistic society, people really are, there are people who would never give their child over to someone else to teach them certain important lessons about life. So we at the fundamental level, we have a trust issue as African people out here. My father didn't complete his traditional rites up in the mountain that he comes from in Nigeria. But my father also put hands on my mother. I don't see a correlation there, but I do wonder about whether that's a conversation that's had in the sacred grove where the boys go and come out men. I really do wonder if those are issues, or have even those traditional rights into adulthood, have they changed or been impacted by capitalism, white supremacy, supremacy, etc. So I think they're important questions to raise, even if there's some sort of cultural shift that we push for. I mean, we're able to move culture. We've done it before in a significant way. And I think the socialization of children is definitely something that we must focus on, whatever that looks like, whatever that needs to look like. Next question, everybody. Oh, I don't know if now is the appropriate time for this WAP question. I'm gonna go to the question after and then come back.
Yes, it is appropriate.
It is appropriate.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go to the other question. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut in. I'm just.
No, go ahead. No, it's true. So I'll read your question. It says, I posted something this week about hashtag WAP that seems to go against the prevailing wisdom of critique of that video. Can I elaborate? Does my response complicate or contradict Jared's argument about the impact of media? So my answer to that question is no. I was very clear, I hope, at the end of my statement that this video and the song is still problematic for all of the reasons that everybody says it's problematic. It is problematic, and it is a product of the toxic corporate cesspool we're swimming in. That was my quote. So no, my goal was not to say that the video and the song are okay and we should all just love it and pass it on to our children and socialize them with this idea about sex and sexuality, which is why the first thing I said is WAP is not for children, right? My understanding of that song and the concept of the song was really my focus, which is, is that impolite for me to say that in this scholarly WAP? For those of you who don't know, WAP. Are there children on here? Is
I hope not.
Children.
Everybody, cover your ears. Cover your children's ears. Take your children out the room.
Sometimes my child is on, she's not currently on, but I do have children in my house. So,
that's why I'm wearing my headphones.
Right. So for me, I draw a very hard line between what's for adults and what's for children, right? And I know that we don't all do that, but that's how I was raised in a certain way, and I think people of a certain generation were raised with a very clear distinction between adult media and what's for children. Now I think people kind of just operate with this assumption that if it's a media product, children will have access to it, as if the parents have no more responsibility and can take no measures to restrict what their children are exposed to. And I think that's, to some degree, I think that's a cop-out, right? Obviously, children are exposed to all kinds of things we don't want them to. Obviously, the media speaks to our children all the time without our permission. So I'm not going to minimize that, but we're going to have the WAP conversation, my daughter and I, when I'm ready to have the conversation with her. Not before. And if she is exposed in some kind of way, I trust that I've raised her in a certain way up until now to be able to have a certain type of conversation with me, and that she would come to me to have a conversation about WAP. And what I'm not going to do is shame her for being curious about it. What I am going to do is talk to her about sex and sexuality as something that is positive, that brings pleasure, that can bring babies, that can do all these other things in her life, that is a part of her reproductive health. And so my only critique in the statement I made on Facebook was, one was the assumption that we need all of our music to be romantic if it has anything to do with sex, that our children will automatically be exposed, and that as we have no power or control over that, and also that this video is somehow like more heinous and crazy than other videos and songs. And the last point is that because of people like Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B, they're inviting people to rape and abuse Black women, as if Black women haven't been raped and abused since we got out here in the West. And again, going back to Malcolm X, these were his observations in an era in which Black women in public primarily wore skirts past their knees and double layers of clothing in the summertime. Okay, this is nothing. This is, rape and abuse is about power. It's about domination. It's about certain ideas about the expendability of women and girls, about asserting a certain type of male dominance. And we can point to all kinds of exhibits. I sometimes, curate at museums. There are copious exhibits where they actually show you the clothing of rape victims. It's not all pum pum shorts and plastic bras, So that's what I'm saying. Like, we get to this degree, to this point of, I think, conservatism, in which we actually start trying to police Black women's expressions of their sexuality, and Black women who are actually singing a song about their own sexual pleasure instead of just giving it. And I think that's a shame. I think that the outrageous and spirited response from Black men about how horrible this song is in light of the rest of the song is just very interesting.
Well, I mean, that to me.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, first of all, I want to do, like, since Kwesi's talking about being honest, I was thinking, I've been out the U.S. for too long, because I was like, what is WAP? What the hell is WAP? Anyhow, and then it dawned on me when we said, okay, fine. But I just want to say something. So I was WhatsApping with a brother yesterday, and we were talking about hype men, right? So I said, no, let me look online and find out who hype men are. So we were looking to see, classic hype men, Professor X, Flavor Flav, blah, blah, blah. So the brother was like, isn't Uncle Luke, a hype man? And I was like, Uncle Luke, let me think about Luke, like Luke, right? So I'm like, when you look at this WAP video and you thinking about Uncle Luke, I mean, you Google Uncle Luke, you don't see nothing but booty cheeks. You know what I'm saying? And women in thongs. So I'm just wondering how, and again, listen, man, what someone does, I wouldn't necessarily be up there like that for a host of other reasons. But why is it, the fundamental contradiction I have is, why is it that when women, exploit their sexuality, which I think is problematic also at times, but when women exploit their sexuality for capital, it becomes a heinous crime. But Uncle Luke, everybody was in the club bumping, dancing to Uncle Luke. Okay, we got a big booty, whoop, 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 right? Everybody was on the dance floor. So I'm wondering to myself, what is this? And why is it that women are chastised for this? Because quite frankly, let's be clear. I can be walking down the street butt naked, and you have no choice. You have no right to rape me, to touch me, to talk crazy to me, to fondle me, to kiss me, whatever. I don't know if you want me to walk down the street butt naked, but I couldn't be walking down the street butt naked, right? It doesn't matter what you have on. Rape is rape, period, end of story.
Right, because what it does is it involves men of their responsibility for their own actions, and it just places all of that responsibility onto women. One of the things that people commented on is the fact that they're playing is some hoes in this house. It's like kind of the sample in the song. And I'm like, okay, and the video is literally in like this, almost like a fun house. It's in a house. And I'm like, I see the problem. It's their house. It's the home's house. The homes own the house, right? And they're hoes with agency. And if they had a pimp, it would be okay. Like, it would just be another song. It's, if Uncle Luke made his little cameo in the video and he was offering the hoe, he was the purveyor of the hoes, it would just be another song. But the whole
would be on the dance floor. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
be on the dance floor.
Right. I'm here for my pleasure in my house. Then it's so offensive. It's like so extra offensive. And that's the thing. That's the question that I have. Like, why is this significant? And people aren't really being honest and genuine and really like actually looking at that. Like, they're criticizing the video without actually answering the question that women are raising, which is, why are you being extra about this? Why is this so jarring?
Or Snoop. Someone said, or Snoop. Absolutely. Snoop always had some women butt naked on his arm. Sorry.
So that's why I wanted to ask you about what you said, because I found what you said to be very interesting. And to me, speaking to what was bothering me about a lot of the responses, which in this particular kind of social media, what is it, virtue signaling moment, it seemed like this is the hot take. It's easy, doesn't require a lot of thought. I'll just say these sisters aren't helping this, whatever, and then I'll get a lot of likes and blah, blah, blah. But which also takes away from a conversation about, as you said, what men's responsibility is or is not. It also takes away from me at least questions of where I might disagree with the two of you. Like, to me, the pimp is the music industry, for one thing. The owners of the like to me, I don't have a problem with women doing whatever that they want to do, but I still don't agree that what they're doing is somehow breaking some mores or revolutionizing society by reclaiming women's sexuality. I don't believe that that's what they're doing. They are capitalizing to the extent that they can off of what, in this case, mostly rich white men will allow them to make money doing. And so they can be in this house and remix hoes in this house and do all of that and take their clothes off and do all of that in a video because the men that own all of the products they're producing have no problem with it. And a lot of the men that consume it don't have a problem with it. Despite what a lot of, folks were saying online. But to me, so on the one hand, I don't blame artists at all, women or men, for the damage of their content, and there are other reasons and a longer argument about that is elsewhere. But I do think that sort of what I said earlier, propaganda doesn't have to be successful, but we do have to understand its intent. And I do think that in this context, we have to understand that one of the reasons why these two women are being are having a quote unquote successful career is because they are upholding and promoting several of whatever this world, those in power, want to be promoted. And what some of the outcome is where I started with my contribution tonight, with young men who will hear this and watch this video, along with all the other men performing the same kind of approach and all of the history behind the men of my generation older who grew up listening to easily Trina, Lil' Kim, Foxy Brown. You mentioned Luke. There's plenty of, when I'm listening to the old hip hop station in the car with my children, I'm constantly having to turn the channel. Like there's constant reminders of how bad my generation's environment was. So I don't see that much as a difference now. The difference, where I see the difference is in the interpretation, or what we're being encouraged is the interpretation, which is again where I think, Yeli, what you said there was so important. Because we're being encouraged to interpret this as an issue of, women performers or sort of, I think, I don't know what I was seeing, an empty sort of, it's a sexist society type of thing. And a lot of important nuance was not being considered. So anyway, that was it.
Jared, right? I know I can't say a ton of stuff, but it's because it was my post. But one of the things that I think, like, to respond to what you just said about young men listening to this song, right? What women have been saying, women who aren't hateful of this song, right? I'm just gonna put myself in the category of we're not hating it, right? What we're thinking is about that very thing. This is a unique song in that a young man might listen to the song and not, instead of what that booty do or what's that P word gonna do for me, he's like, how am I going to please that wife? What do I need to do to make me feel good? Because they've actually told me now that matters. I've got to figure that out, right? That's new, okay? For women who have been listening to this music for decades, that is a new consideration that most of the men we interact with never have to think of as.
I don't know, because when I was in the club and they would, and for instance, when Akinelli's track came on, the Put It in Your Mouth track from back in the day, there was a woman's verse on there that said the same thing. Put mine in your mouth.
That one song, and that was
I'm not saying no. I'm not. But what I'm saying is, just like now, I don't think this signals any more of a prevalence of women saying we must be pleasured as well. Lil Kim, Trina, all of them had tracks about
yeah, exactly.
We're not just you got to work this too. We're not just here. So again, I'm not. And my only point is, well, I guess I don't know. So I'm just saying I don't know that I don't think that this is unique. What I find unique about this video is its availability compared to when I was growing up. I mean, we had to work very hard to catch what little nudity we got to see. And when this video was promoted in a news clip to me, in the news thing I was looking at, they actually were blurring the video. So I still actually haven't seen the whole video unblurred. So I mean, and when I was growing up, that would have never been the case. There would have not been that level of nudity, and it would not have been talked about on a YouTube channel that I could click on whenever I wanted to. So that would be the to me where the biggest differences are.
But can I also say that I think honestly, I actually don't like the song, right? I don't think it's lyrically. No, let's be honest. I don't think it's lyrically down. I don't like the song. The contradiction that I'm down with having a conversation about desexualizing sex for men and women. Like I'm down about having that, like degenderizing or I'm down about having that kind of a conversation. And if that conversation comes around, having open and honest conversations about sex and sexuality and pleasure and what that looks like, and women should not just be used as sex objects and in the domestic sphere, I'm absolutely down with that. Is this video necessarily the way to do that? Probably not. But the issue that I have with this whole conversation and commentary is, and again, let's be honest with ourselves. I was running yesterday and I was running to Biggie Small. I like Biggie Small, okay? But when it gets to the song where Biggie's talking about Big Papa don't love me no more, and I did this and that, and and you're speaking about potentially a young girl with no hair in her vagina area, I have to fast forward because
isn't kicking the door, waving the 4-4 to a woman? Isn't that verse to a woman?
Exactly. And so I'm saying, what is happening, right? So I'm suggesting that. So I'm saying this to say that much of I don't know why I said that. Oh, this is what I said. That I said that to say that we recognize that there are problematic elements in multiple aspects, and the question becomes how do we take like culture and use it to educate without having some of these problematic issues. And since we're talking about hip hop, when we're thinking about like Tupac, for example, I mean, like Tupac was like this guy, like this multiple personality rapper. I mean, in one sense, you're talking about Dear Mama. In other sense, you're talking about stuff that could be problematic. I bet you really want to pass that over with your children. And so the question becomes, and I'm saying, I don't know why I'm saying this, but I'm just thinking out loud about the over-sexualization of women. This is not new. It has been going on. And so the question becomes, how do we take this kind of a conversation into spaces which we in different spaces and not just online or not, you know what I mean? Like how do we talk about women's and men's sexuality and honesty in a way that makes everyone feel comfortable without, necessarily doing this shock value? I don't know. And again, I'm not like, if they want to do whatever I'm down. If Uncle Luke can do it, you can do it. I won't do it, but if Uncle Luke can do it, you can do it. But we need to elevate the conversation beyond, a woman rapping who's making millions of dollars and she's exploiting her sexuality as many women have before for money, really.
Agreed. Yeah. Go ahead, Kwesi.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick. One, to say that we have about 16 minutes left in our time, just to keep us on track, and those who have joined us. But also to say that I'm not going to add to what's already been said. But I will say this, that a lot of what's been said is really underscored, by the idea of gender that we're all, walking under this cloud and not realizing that it's cloudy. And I say that to say that, women are built to be understood as emotional and as the receptacle of violence, meaning they are women because they're without a penis, because they're without power, and they are constructed that way because those are the possessions of men, we're told, according to that mythology. And I'm saying that mythology is that cloud that runs through us in ways that I don't think we can even start to appreciate. And I'll give you one quick example of this. I remember having a discussion with my wife about the fact that in our partnership, and we have to fight to make it a partnership, because what I'm asking for, goes against, what the things that men ask for. I mean, I've changed diapers and my penis doesn't fall off for doing so. I take joy in that, in taking care of my children much as he does. So we're having a discussion about shopping for clothing for girls. We have 3 girls, right? And I'm saying to her, my argument is that I should be a part of that. And she's, of course, wondering, well, why? That is a female domain, that I should not be a part of that. That's taboo. And I said that, no, I have to be part of the conversation about deciding what clothing and therefore what manner and ways our daughters will be perceived, because we can't control how other people perceive them when they leave our doors. But what we can control, at least mitigate, is at least certain triggers, for that perception. And so she again could not fathom that there is a role for me in deciding what kind of clothing the girls, should be purchased. And I had to share with her, which I think applies to us here in this conversation, is that I said, you may think that you are independently deciding what you want to wear and go outside because you want to feel sexy, you want to feel like a woman. But I guarantee that most of the ideas that are shaping what you think is quote unquote your decision is not your decision. And of course, that's something, she didn't want to hear. And most people don't want to hear. I don't want to hear it either. But I think there's a very thick line of truth to that, is that a lot of what we're thinking is liberating, is somehow, allowing for women to, be themselves. I take Toni Morrison's position in the sense that she was at Cornell some years ago when I was a student, and she said this, that, there's a blurring between the public and the private, and whereby we can't distinguish the two. And there's some conversation in terms of gendered, intimate matters that are private, that are household, right? And there's some that just not. And to make these matters that are private public, it confuses rather than clarifies, the very topic that we're trying to discuss. And I think the video adds to it in that direction. There's no clarity from that by saying that, women should share their sexuality out in public about what they do, because that's a private matter, meaning I've never seen anyone, maybe you have, had, sex in public. That's a private matter in the vast majority of cases. And so when those lines are blurred, because obviously there's something to be made, money to be made from it, that to me is the bigger issue than what these 2 women are doing in that video. And that issue is, again, how much of our lives is being orchestrated without us really appreciating fully, and thinking that we're actually have some agency or autonomy, in this.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry, Kwesi said something that kind of struck me a bit. And so I just want to say this, that I understand that there's this line, and I know we have to stop soon, but there's this line between like public and private, right? But I think the challenge that we have in a male-dominated society is that the public space dictates what sex and sexuality for women is, not necessarily the private space, right? Our ideology dictates what is acceptable and the roles, the domesticated roles that women play. And I think that that's part of the fundamental contradiction. Why women are saying we need to have these conversations publicly, because publicly our role in the family as domestics, right? And I'm not diminishing, people's contributions to family, but that role is often and our ability to engage in sex or sexuality for whether it's birthing children, whether it's pleasure, whatever the case may be, is not on par or is not equal to that of men. And if that was the case, and we did have public equality around our sex and sexuality, there wouldn't be female genital mutilation, right? Women's clitoris would be cut off at young age.
Well, no, because equality is a fiction. It's not possible. And so if the goal is equality, then we're already, already starting the wrong race. And even the genital mutilation that it has referred to, it has to be put into context. There are studies, and we can refer some of the folks here, to those. But in those studies, those are usually, in terms of Africa, those are usually the places that there is sufficient participation and willingness from the women to do so. Meaning, actually, women actually lead that. And second, there's an overlay in those situations where Islam is also a factor. I remember going to the Vagina Monologue years ago with a friend to see it. And it's a terrible, play, but I remember seeing it, and that was a topic, but it was all out of context, as if all of Africa does this. And I'm saying, no, there's specific places where this is the case, but there's nuance to it. It's not simply, men authorizing the physical massacre of certain portions of a woman's vagina.
Well,
no, but can I just say this because I want to respond to that. I agree that women participate in this. And that's the thing. When I'm saying it's public, I'm not saying that men are somehow dictating women's sexuality. I'm saying publicly or in the public space, women's sexuality is dictated, right? And men's sexuality is also dictated. And the question becomes, if we're saying it's public and private, everyone's access to their ability to determine what is sexually appropriate for them should be in private. It shouldn't be dictated in the public, is what I'm suggesting. And I don't know if it's just in places where Islam is prevalent. There are some places where Christianity is also prevalent where FGM occurs. But I get your point. It's not the procedure is not by any means performed by men. It's not. And it's reinforced oftentimes by women, which says that women are also negatively impacted by patriarchy and also reinforce patriarchy. I agree with you 100% on that one.
Thank you. Yes, that women themselves participate in the patriarchy and perpetuate and maintain the patriarchy. So let's not oversimplify, even as we try to bring nuance. Like there's still that, right? Even in these traditional cultures. Traditional ain't been traditional for a very long time. Most of us don't even really know what it is because we don't go back far enough in some of these societies before Islam, before etc., before all of these number of things. And we also don't dig into the deep culture and really understanding why some of these things are happening. So we also read these situations, we read these traditions with a modern lens as well. So it's complicated, right? As is the issue of defensively dressing our daughters. Because that's what it is. It's defensive dressing. It's not, because of anything else. We're defending them against rape culture outside our households and sometimes inside our households. And we can try to make it about all these other issues, but it's defensive dressing. And we all participate to varying degrees. I do that. I would love to be out here wearing almost no clothes because it's 100 degrees every day in Maryland. But I can't afford to take those safety risks and to inconvenience myself in the day because of men's responses, because of responses from men who don't take responsibility for their own actions, who don't care about my personal safety, who don't have a certain sense of propriety. Somehow I'll be the one, creating a problem, and I will be blamed because they couldn't control themselves and their behaviors, right? And so it's defensive dressing. So patriarchy having no gender is an issue. I wanted to bring up this last question. I just need to put it on the table. about toxic femininity and what that looks like. Right. Toxic femininity. What does that look like? What is that? Does that play a role in what we're talking about in terms of domestic violence, etc.? And then each of you is going to take 1 minute and make a final comment. So even if you want to just tackle this question and then roll that in with your last comment, let's do that too. Anybody?
I'll just say quickly, toxic femininity is about abuse of power by women, quite straight up. It's abuse of power by women, often mitigated by older women who get into entanglements, as someone suggested. That's it. That's my close.
Look, I'll just say one of the reasons why I wanted to participate in a collective like this is because there are a lot of people out here taking advantage. One reason is that there are a lot of people out here taking advantage of the myriad problems we're all dealing with for their own personal reasons. Some of it is to present and package responses to these problems in very palatable and commercially fundable ways. And others are to get some personal clout and credibility by making a hot take on or offering a hot take on something, and it's not coming out of collective study and engagement with a certain, I think, collective principle in mind. So I think that plays out even in terms of the way people take advantage of various forms of oppression as it hits them. Unprincipled men will take advantage of moments where they have an upper hand. Unprincipled women will take advantage of moments where they too have an upper hand. And then it's up to I think the collectives of us to figure out the best ways to address this and to find out when, I think we've done somewhat of a good job tonight, when there are actual demonstrable variables, for lack of a better term, that need to be addressed. I mean, so in the case, women are suffering a particular experience here that needs to be addressed, even as sometimes women take advantage of that for unprincipled purposes. And that's, again, why I think, we all need to be working in groups, whatever our egos or our self-worth is. These are collective issues. And even those of us in academia and activism in particular need to be working in collectives to respond. So thank you, everybody in this collective and those who are supporting this work and joining us. I really appreciate all of our efforts here. So thank you all.
I certainly second what Njiva and Jared has certainly said, that this is why I don't, I'm not in the canoe of feminism, because it takes sides, and it takes a particular side. I don't know what the word is. Maybe we can create one for the side that takes the collective, as its starting point. Maybe we can create that, Jared and Njiva and Yele, because English is very impoverished. But I'm all for the work of the partnership, the work of the household, the work of the family, and linking up those families to collective, because that's when you can have safe space. You can't have safe space without having this fence, that is the community. And this is not aspirational or inspirational. It's just a matter of fact, because we know that this is what works when we have it. And we have all had, in our lifetimes, the experience of being part of communities that work. And so this is essentially the work ahead, is that that's the way in which we deal with preventatively some of these matters, but also begin to build and socialize in ways that look for another proposal of the world.
Thank you so much. That was a perfect ending statement. I think we can all get behind that. Thank you to all of our commenters and all the wonderful, important, thought-provoking comments. Thank you to the rest of the collective members for all of your thoughts and all of your feelings and your personal stories. Also, our next topic is going to be on organizing and organization building within our spaces. And this is one of the issues that we can organize around. So let's unpack how we do that and how we can make that a better process for ourselves and really critique our organizations and organizing. Thank you all so much. Peace. And if you're willing to fight for it, right, Jared? And we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. And thank you, Todd, for doing the chat.
Thanks, Todd.